All right, I see everybody's coming in. So let's get started. My name is Nicholas St. Pierre. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Agilicus. Welcome back. If it's not your first time, I like to do these small platform showcase highlighting specific features of the NEX Zero Trust platform by Agilicus. Today, I think through requests and chatting, the comments have been sort of specific on a platform, like if I have Rockwell Automation or Rockwell Studio platforms, RS Logics, RS Links, and so on. Now, how do I use your platform, and is it really transparent? Do I need a VPN to get into my remote PLCs? And the answer is always no. The subsequent follow-on question is show us, right? So today we'll take a look at this very specifically. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get started. When we look at the, let's just change the slide here. There we go. So today we'll look at, what is the Agilicus NEX platform. We'll look at how Zero Trust applies itself as an approach to security in operational technology. We'll look at specific topologies of where Agilicus is used in industrial control systems. We'll look at how identity integrates itself into operational technology. Air gap systems in Zero Trust envelops the whole thing. And then we'll look at demonstrating what Zero Trust network access looks like versus a VPN. There'll be a distinct lack of VPN clients today, so hopefully you'll notice that and see the differentiation between Zero Trust network access and VPN. And lastly, we'll do a real-world launch of a Rockwell tool. In this case, we'll use RS Links, RS Who, and we'll go look at PLCs behind an industrial control system from across the network, and doing so around the Zero Trust model as well. So, what is Zero Trust in operational technology and OT, and how do we use it? Ultimately, from the approach of Zero Trust network access, there's always three things we want to do when we apply it to legacy tooling. First one is we need to understand who the identity or the person using the resources. We're going to move away from handing out username and passwords, creating accounts, and we just want to get that person to authenticate and verify who they are through the means that they use today. And what I mean by that is they may have an employment email address, or they may be self-employed, they may have a Google email account, but they may have multi-factor with a USB key or through the one-time password. But ultimately, we just want to confirm the identity of the person through their known devices and known means of logging in. The second portion is, what do they need to access as a resource? In this case, today we'll talk specifically about industrial control system devices and PLCs, for example. We can look at PLC. Is it an HMI? Is it a web interface? Is it a web-driven HMI or a thick application? The second phase of that is, what is the piece of software communicating with this? So we're not going to talk about the higher-end OSI layer of networking. We're going to talk about the application itself. Most importantly, what level of resources do we need to make available to that application, and what level of permissions do we need to make available to that application so that it can actually function properly across the network and to the far end of the industrial control zone. The third one is how we're going to access this, and that's the interesting part here with Agilicus NEX. We're going to show how the connector software of Agilicus can be deployed within an industrial control system zone, completely air-gapped as the devices would be, and act as somewhat a network diode, for example, and allow connectivity in for industrial control system tooling while preserving the full DMZ up into the IT network. So let's look at what that looks like. First of all, identity, very important. Each person within your organization should have access to the resources that they need to accomplish their work. But let's stop thinking about username and passwords. Let's look about credentials that we have today. Those could be through an Azure AD, for example. An Active Directory could be an online Office 365 subscription or account if your company or organization is authenticated through Microsoft tools. Could be as easy as a Skype account, for example, that is now owned by Microsoft. Could be a Google G Suite. let's look at multi-factor. We are all used to one-time passwords today. We can use devices like Android or iOS that have multi-factor integrated by simply unlocking our phones with our thumbprint, for example, or Face ID. This can be done regardless of employer across multiple identity providers. We can create authorization rules in our platform and in typical zero trust models here to understand which resource, which user has access to, at what time of day, for example, and when in our network they're allowed to access very specific resource. Again, not accessing the network as a whole, not have the ability to traverse east-west within our industrial network. Really segment the actual resource that is to be accessed. We want to have audit. The concept of governance, risk management, and compliance, or GRC, is coming. The ability to audit who's using what, even if we have a shared accounts, for example. I may be giving access to my PLCs to multiple people. I still need to know and want to know, in case of a breach or in case of a security incident, exactly which identities use which industrial tools. I want to have that complete audit. I don't need a VPN. I don't want to give network access, either layer 2, layer 3, or IP ranges to either my contractors. I may have overlapping IPs, for example, from one site to another, where I typically, with a VPN, would need to disconnect every time and reconnect to separate sites. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to access PLCs wherever they are, wherever site they may be, even if they share, for example, internal IP space, which is a really interesting concept. Most of all, I want to have something called a security posture, and I want it to be extremely clean. I want my security posture management, the default configuration, the default securities to be up to par. What that means here is I don't want to have to scan for my inbound port policies on my firewall to allow inbound VPNs to my VPN concentrator. I want to block all inbound connectivity typically in my firewall. I may allow outbound to a zero trust platform like Agillicus NEX, but ultimately I don't want to have a rule by exception mantra or approach into my security posture. I don't want to always have to audit my firewall for all the exceptions that are inbound. I don't want to have DMZs, servers that are exposed either on one leg or limited availability for web HMI, for example, especially for a PLC where I would typically keep them completely air-gapped. So those are the better ways of doing zero trust. We federate identity, resources, we have granular access, and we have full audit. So let's look at what that gives us. So when we talk about all-in-one zero trust access, we want to unify all of our identity. Like I mentioned, we don't want to create new resources, new accounts. I want employees to log in with their employee credentials. I want contractors and vendors to continue to log in with their existing employment identities. So for example, if they churn out, they change employment, I don't need to have a workflow necessarily to go and deactivate these VPN accounts. The mere fact that they're no longer on the payroll, they're no longer able to identify through their contractor or vendor identity, negates the access to those resources, even if they have the internal credentials into my network. Ultimately, I could have multiple vendors. I don't want to have to manage these through local licenses on my Active Directory either. So keeping the federated identity that we just talked about a little bit, no new user IDs and passwords. It's a really good policy. I don't have to tell people that they have to remember new identities, new password that gets shared within my organization. I want to be able to use any device where the software or the industrial control system software or the OT software can run. I want to enable multi-factor, very important, across all devices without having to roll out new software components. Again, new software components, no VPN. And I want to enable single sign-on. If you're able and are granted the ability to use multiple tools for operational technology, you should be able to do so without always constantly having to prove who you are, if that's what the security policies highlight. On the access side of zero trust, very important, we talked about security posture management. I want to have a device like the Agillicus connector that only ever connects outbound with my network. There is no inbound rule requirement. I want to have the authorization that is really fine-grained. I mentioned who, what, when gets access to resources. I want a full audit. What software, from what identity, what person used this, and for how long. I want to keep my resources in my industrial control zones off the internet. They continue to be air-gapped, but the local Agilicus connector, in this case here, the blue icon with Agilicus, is able to reach to them, and it may have VLAN segmentation or zone segmentation where it's also able to reach out to the internet, but it does not route packet. I don't have the ability for my SCADA system to get out on the internet. They're still completely air-gapped because I have a full set of resource segmentation that is still appropriate for my network. And I want to be compliant with all the security standards. We talk about public works utility, water system utility, requirements from the EPA, for example, from the point of view of zero trust, but also the way that network access is granted. This is very important, and this needs to continue as well. So we looked at zero trust, the who, the what, and the how. Let's make it very relevant here for today's demo. In the identity piece today, I'll be using my corporate identity with Agilicus. My email, if you want to reach me, nick@agilicus.com is the email that I will be using. This is managed from a shared identity provider by Google G Suite. So my identity phase and the authentication phase that I will use in the zero trust model today will be handled by Google. So that will be very different. I'll be signing in with a specific username on a VPN client. I will demonstrate we will simply be redirected to Google when I launch my industrial application. The industrial application will not be aware of that, but we'll see the browser pop up. From the authorization here phase of the zero trust, what resource and what permissions do I need? From the client side, I need to authorize the piece of software in our cloud platform that will be using zero trust, that will be requiring access to the PLC. In this case, we'll be using RSLinks Classic. This will use an Ethernet driver. We will point it to a resource, which was the second part of the what, and we will be able to connect to it transparently across the network. That piece of software will be an Allen Bradley Compact Logix. We'll give it a host name. We'll call it Compact Logix, and we'll tell our Zero Trust Cloud Platform, NEX, that the RSLinks client is able to communicate with a host name called Compact Logix. That's the only connectivity that will be established across the internet securely over TLS. Lastly is how we're going to do this. First is the connector piece of software. We're going to route RSLinks to this connector via our cloud platform, via the previously established outbound connections. Like I mentioned, our security posture model here is very clean. There will be a valid session token after we have authenticated and demonstrating our identity through Google G Suite, and we'll then be able to connect to the Compact Logix PLC. So these are the components that we will see in the demo. Remember, my identity, Nick@Agilicus, no one else. Second, the piece of software client I'm going to be using today in my Windows environment, RSLinks. The device I'm going to be going to, the Compact Logix PLC, and all of it will be routed through the Agilicus NEX Zero Trust platform. From end to end, this is what it looks like. Right? I have my identities on the left side. I have the cloud platform of NEX that provides zero trust access transparently to these applications to the far end and what they are. So on the left-hand side, I will be using my identity, Nick@Agilicus. I will use my single sign-on with Google G Suite because this is what our organization uses, but it could be Microsoft, it could be Yahoo, it could be, and you'll see that in the demo, it could be a local identity provider, it could be an account that I have on a NAS, in this case Synology, that will be present. I will be doing so from my workstation. It will be located from an IP geolocation perspective in the UK, so we're getting some latency here. We're not one tabletop to another. And I will be demonstrating this public IP address to you as well. So I have a browser up running that will show you the geo IP of my workstation. And I will be launching RSLinks. When I do so, I will be pointing it to a hostname called Compact Logix. That hostname that I've created in the NEX platform in the center there allows my identity to reach this network resource. And this network resource is here in Canada in one of our lab, and I will be therefore traversing the Atlantic to get to this Compact Logix PLC. So when we want to look at it here, I will be pulling up a screen, and let's look at what that actually gives us. If you just give me a moment, I will share that screen, and we will go ahead and look at that demo. Okay, so Here we are. We have a shared screen. We are looking. Okay, and here we are. We now have a shared screen showing a Windows 11 operating system. We can see that my local IP, if I highlight it here in the screen, is 192.168.10.15. So my local network is really 192.168.10. My public IP address is out of Manchester. So we are currently, as we see in the GeoIP lookup, in Europe. The Agillicus platform integrates with the desktop to allow us to launch industrial control system applications, such as today, for example, Studio 5000 by Rockwell Automation. I'm going to show you how, as we saw in the topology, I am able to launch RSLinx and its RSWho component. In this case, we'll use RSLinx Classic to access a PLC behind a industrial control network in a PLC zone that is completely air-gapped and disconnected from the internet. In order to do that, I'm going to be able to launch RSLinx Classic from this desktop here in Europe. I'm going to be able to identify myself, which is going to be a requirement to verify my identity to be able to access the PLC resource that we have highlighted by name here as CompactLogix. We're going to start RSLinx Classic. We are going to configure with the Ethernet driver the location of this hostname, and we are going to transparently traverse through the Agillicus NEX platform using Zero Trust to detect this PLC behind the firewall. All of this will be done obviously without any specific network client to do this. So Agillicus, like I mentioned, integrates into our desktop, and you can see here I have a start menu with a few application launchers. I've made this Windows available, but clicking on the Windows Start menu would show Agillicus and then a series of launchers that are accessible through this identity. So as I double click here to start the RSLinx Classic, we can see immediately we are intercepted through the Zero Trust framework of the NEX platform, and we need to identify ourselves through one of many available shared identity providers. Those could be internet-based, such as Google, Microsoft, Office 365, Azure, Skype, and so on. But we have a variety of OpenID Connect flexibility here as far as providers. I could do it with Yahoo, I could do it with my local internet provider as long as they have OpenID Connect compatibility. We also have local usernames such as Synology NAS, for example, or other embedded devices that may have local users locally. It could be a Windows local login. I'm going to sign in here with my corporate credentials. I'll remind you, we are in the authentication phase for RSLinx to be able to access a resource, and this resource is assigned to an identity, and in this case it will be my Agillicus identity. Notice the authentication phase here is taken over by Google, and we are simply trying to confirm the identity through a valid authentication request. We see that the authentication request has completed, and it says authentication flow as completed. At this point, RSLinx is free to start on its own and to display itself. So as soon as it finishes starting, we will actually go and get RSLinx Classic for us. So now we have RSLinx Classic running, and let me bring it over to this screen. And we see we have my workstation, which is in the UK and out of Manchester. And I am now able to communicate with a single resource that I highlighted previously in the topology, which is CompactLogix. So let's do this. We are going to configure a driver. We're going to make a new Ethernet device driver. And we're going to call it Agillicus here for the sake of uniqueness. And now comes the discovery of the host name. As we saw in the topology, I have assigned a host name to this PLC called CompactLogix. So I'm going to enter that here as my host name. So once I have CompactLogix, Logix, and I'm going to specify the port here as an Ethernet IP device, which is TCP port 44818 for those devices. So now I am transparently instructing RSLinx to do a name lookup for that host resource, CompactLogix, and it will try to go out through the system. As I've already identified myself. The application now has access to this very specific resource, and I'm going to close. And now I have my Agilicus Ethernet, and I am trying to reach out to the network. So let's see. Okay, so now I see a discovery of my device and my compact logics, and I can look at my diagnostics here, and I can actually see that I have the number of resources that are being browsed in real time. I can expand this here to see what other resources are being discovered, and I still see, for example, on this device, all the devices being discovered. I have the number of requests per second that are going through. I see all the commands going in and out. Now, a couple things to observe. My internal IP, as we see here, is 192.168.10.15. My public IP is 89.44.201.163. The host that I'm trying to reach is called Compact Logics. It resolves internally on the industrial network where it's deployed as 169.254.39.2. So what this means is I am traversing a network to reach another one. This address, 169.254.39.21, is a local address. It is not publicly routable. However, RSLogix is able to traverse through the Agilicus NEX platform using Zero Trust to confirm our identity. We've used my corporate identity, nick@agilicus.com. RSLinks is transparently being terminated through the connector device on the remote network and able to browse the local PLC network. I am effectively cross-Atlantic, browsing the entire chassis, able to look at devices, so I could use, for example, VectorTalk View Studio or Studio 5000 and browse all of my network's devices as I am entitled to by the fact that I have assigned resources to this profile and this my identity. So I've linked three concepts here of Zero Trust: who, me as an identity, what as the PLC itself, as the address, the 169.254.39.2, by virtue of assigning a host name that I can reach out. And finally, the how of the Zero Trust component is where is this located? Which connector am I routing through? And notice here that I do not have network access. I cannot ping 169.254.39.2 from my local PC. Only Compact Logics, by virtue of having launched it through the integrated launcher here, my desktop integration on the right-hand side, is able to communicate with this chassis by using the Compact Logics host and the verification of my identity. I could be loading different devices of different PLCs at different sites, at different networks altogether here. As long as I was granted this resource by hostname, I could be able to reach them. They could even bear the same IP address. If you would like to see different demonstrations of different products, please reach out to me. Always happy to do a conversation and enhance the way that we present our product. I would like to thank Track Control today for helping us on the logistics of setting up this demo. And again, let's go see the topology and review what we have just demonstrated. Okay, so from there, what we do see here is the ability that we have demonstrated the demo is from an end-to-end perspective. We saw that the first thing I did is I launched RSLinks. When I did so, I was automatically redirected because of the desktop integration. RSLinks needed to have access to an identity in order to launch successfully. I was redirected to a portal that offered me a set of identity providers. I chose my corporate one, nick@agilicus.com, because that is the one that has been assigned a grant of resources to the PLC. After I was successful in identifying myself via Google, RSLinks started, and I was able to then configure the devices that I want. At that point, RSLinks Classic was traversing through the Agilicus NEX platform. It was transparently being encrypted, being forwarded through a secure tunnel from the Agilicus NEX platform over TLS into the remote site. Once it traversed, it was able to reach the host name that we called Compact Logics. And this is why when I created the Ethernet driver, I added a host, Compact Logics, because that is the only one that was actually reachable. If I wanted to give it access to more resources, I simply needed to enumerate these devices. So I've used the three concepts here in this demo. The first one was my federated identity. I used Nick at Agillicus to run the application. I was then authorized centrally through the Agillicus NEX platform. And there's a full audit log now of me having used an application, RSLinx Classic, to access a very specific device, a Compact Logics device. All the Compact Logics device itself being behind the industrial control system zone and being air-gapped. However, my connectivity was being delivered to it via the Agillicus connector deployed on the local site, the industrial zone. If you would like more information, please engage. Send me an email, nick@agillicus.com. Happy to review the demo that I did today from our platform showcase. I would like to say a special thank you to our customer track control who helped with the logistics today in making this happen from a technical perspective. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate. We're always here to have